Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about how does the virus life cycle connect to the central dogma. To understand how viruses connect to the central dogma, it's first fundamental to understand what the central dogma is. In 1958, Francis Crick was the first person to discover this concept. He said the central dogma is how genetic information can be utilized to create useful and workable components that the cells need to survive and reproduce. The central dogma functions as a flowchart that starts with DNA, continues on to RNA, and is able to form proteins following that. Transcription is the process of DNA being transcribed into RNA. Then following that, RNA can be made to proteins by the process of translation. Now that you have a general understanding of what the central dogma is, we can use that knowledge to connect it to the virus life cycle when they infect host cells, like humans. Viruses are small particles that typically contain a coating of protein protection that surrounds genetic material. When they infect cells, they are able to inject the genetic material, which for simplicity's sake for now, we will say it's only DNA. Once the DNA is within the host cell, it can use the host cell's resources and undergo transcription to make RNA, which then can undergo translation to make more of the protein coding and DNA replication. This then allows for the assembly of a whole new virus. However, it isn't always this simple, and there are a few exceptions. As I mentioned earlier, there is genetic material inside the viruses. This genetic material is not just DNA, but there are also RNA viruses. So when these RNA viruses infect cells, they skip the transcription step of the central dogma and continue right into the translational step. Another complication of the central dogma is when viruses go against the central dogma. Some viruses will use a special enzyme called reverse transcriptase, which will allow the use of RNA to transcribe DNA. This is an example of how the idea of central dogma is violated, which is something Francis Crick did not know when concocting his fundamental theory. Therefore, the virus life cycle is one that is simple yet extremely complex. It closely follows the idea of central dogma, but with a few key exceptions. This is just a quick overview of some of the general topics involving viruses and their connection to the central dogma. Thank you for listening.
Created using Powtoon.